matter where you are in your career, or no matter what path you're on right now, like a degree from a certain college doesn't define who you are the same thing as a title doesn't define who you are or the company that you work for, right? And I think that those are the things that are so important. Society, just we get caught up in these labels, like you have to work at a certain company for X amount of years or else you're labeled a jumper, or you move around too much, right?
So true.
Or you have to work and you have to get the house and you have to have the picket fence and have the kids, and it's like it's not for everyone.
Welcome to the Warriors at Work show. This is Jeanie Coomber, your guide and host. This is a show for men and women in the workplace who want to move from the predictable to the potent. This is your weekly dose of inspiration with an edge. I talk with CEOs and shamans, sports marketing executives and therapists. All of us are like-minded thinkers and doers who tell stories, share wisdom, and challenge each other to have the best life possible inside and outside the office. Welcome to your Warrior Conversation.
Hey everybody, it's Jeanie. Thank you so much for being here with me at the Warriors at Work show. All right, you're about to hear something a little different. So I often ask myself really, really big questions at just different intervals of time during the year. And I don't know if it's an age thing. Maybe it's because of the tough 2022 that myself, my husband, and my family went through. Or maybe it's just a sign of maturity and that it's time to reflect and reconnect with an inner voice, but yet talk it through out loud with somebody else. And so I started wondering, all right, who's the somebody else? I want somebody who doesn't look like me, sound like me, has a different experience, and is also on a different path. So I thought about who in my network fits that bill, and nobody is better than Elisa Padilla. And so the conversations you're about to hear, there are three. One is, who am I? So we talk about who we both are, where we come from, why this work. And then the second conversation is, how do we show up in the world? What are the things that matter? And then the third is something that's really near and dear to both of our hearts into how we are living our lives. And that is through community, networking. How do you blend the two? And so the conversations you're about to hear, we walk you through various paths. And here's what I can promise you. These conversations are unfiltered. We talk about big things in our lives, personal things in our lives. We share our big questions. We share our lessons. And then we talk about what are the things that we're still struggling with as we're moving on in our lives and what we all have in common. And a lot of the commonalities I didn't quite expect. And my guess is, as you're sitting here and you're listening to these, you're going to see you also have a lot in common to a lot of the things that we're talking about. And so Elisa Padilla is such a gift to me, and I feel so incredibly blessed and privileged to bring to you these conversations. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing as you're listening to these, please know you are not alone. We see you. We hear you. We are all here doing this together. Enjoy. All right, here we are, Elisa. I'm so excited to riff with you. As I shared with you before we hit the record button, and we don't riff enough. Like riffing is like the center of so many amazing things, like great ideas, understanding what's going on underneath the surface, getting out of our intellectual and thinking minds, which we spend way too much time on in our business self. And I know we're going to tackle like a lot of big questions, big things that come up for us. And one of the very first things that I always do whenever I'm getting to know a new client is I need to know who they are. Like, who are they in the world? What do they stand for? What do they believe in? So even though I know you, I don't think I've really ever asked you, like, who is Elisa?
Wow. Okay. So it's interesting because I think that had you asked me that question pre-COVID, it would have been a different answer versus post-COVID. And I know that's how we're measuring a lot of things these days, right? But I think that pre-COVID, it was very career focused. It was about climbing the career ladder, getting to the top. And while I have had amazing successes and tremendous accomplishments, post COVID, that's not who I am, because I learned that my title does not define who I am as a person. And I think that that's very, very important, for all of us to understand that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Jeanie, based on the work that you do?
When I think of, I go back to my younger self. So my younger self would have been, I was a seeker. What's next? What's next? Okay. And I would especially be fueled if someone said, you can't do that, though. That won't work. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, you watch me. And sometimes I would do it just for the sake of saying that I did it. And I think through a lot of loss and life challenges, and then going through COVID, like, everybody else, I lost a lot of opportunity and financial security as an entrepreneur. I went back to who am I in the world, and what do I stand for? And the word service then became such a key ingredient, because I really started to think about, like, well, what am I putting out into the world really? How am I having an impact on other people? It's always been this idea of how many people can I help? And I didn't really have a tremendous amount of awareness to that until I was faced with loss and missing things that made me feel important. And I was a road warrior. I honestly was like, badge of honor. I'm on airplanes. I'm on the Acela, and I'm driving in and out of New York. And aren't I fancy? And like, why? What was that about? And then starting to get really clear on the servicing piece is like, now what lights me up is if I can hear someone say, I feel better. That really helped me make a better decision. That was a really tough thing I went through, but I felt supported and seen and heard. There's just nothing better about that. And that is now what fuels me. And it's prompting me to ask like bigger questions in the world. And I start to notice, and I'm curious if this resonates for you, is I attract more people that have that belief system. Versus I think previously I was attracting other, road warriors. Head down, get it done, make sure you get the promotion. And there's no judgment. That was the world I was in. But I feel like there's this greater consciousness. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's so interesting, because I think that when you have loss and you go through loss, things are put into perspective, right? And I think that very similar to when I was in corporate America, trying to become CMO of a team, there was a point when I went from director to vice president where the tables turned, and it was no longer about my career. It was about the career of those that were on my team, right? It was about creating leaders. It was about, like, I would wake up in the morning and all I would think about was setting my team up for success and setting my boss up for success. It was no longer about, right, Elisa, and my career. And, and now it's, I had mentioned earlier that for me now it's all about like fueling my soul. And what fuels my soul is being able to put goodness into the world, right? And being able to, inspire, educate, and, just paying it forward. But it's at a human level. And not that I wasn't like that before, but now it's just like, that's what fuels my soul, right? It's just like, what am I going to share today that's going to resonate? And whose day am I going to make better? And it's not about who's going to make my day better, because that's not even top of mind.
And your messages in particular on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And for anybody listening that doesn't follow Elisa, you need to, because you put out some incredible, simple, inspirational messages. Just like one of my favorites was like, stand tall, shoulders back, don't listen to what someone else says about you. What do you believe in yourself?
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
it's like simple messages that I find so interesting. So you really you're walking in your truth, and I think you're sharing what you're learning,
Yeah,
and I think
because
that's really important as well.
because you know what, Jeannie, I think what's important for those that are listening is that you get to a point where you can share what you've experienced. And the feedback that I've been getting is that, wow, like I felt that way. That really resonated.
Mm.
I never said it. How are you saying it? And it's not, it's about sharing experiences that we all have and how they make us feel, because it's all about how we feel, right?
Mm.
And when we feel good, the output is very different than when we feel bad, right? And it's in being so in tune with how you're feeling and your place in the world is, I think that's really important. And I think that, some of us, there's some people out there that don't think about that.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important.
I think that's one of the silver linings, if there is any, that's come from the pandemic, is that we've gone back to ourselves. We will talk more openly about, from a human being standpoint, how we're doing. And there's just nothing better, I think, than when you're with other people, you say something or you hear something that they say, and you're like, "Oh, you too? That happens to you too? You
Yeah.
believe that too? But you
Yeah.
have all of this, you have all of that," or very often it's like, "But you have this title." But it's like, yeah, but it's a person behind all of that responsibility.
Yeah.
And there's just nothing better than being seen and heard and understood as a human being, and accepting all of the dimensions of who you are. I just think that is so important. And that to me is something that we have a lot of latitude now, thankfully, to be able to do those types of things. Because I think, the seeker in me was be buttoned up, mustn't say this to this one, only talk to this one. It's like almost like a robot. I can only gripe or complain if I'm with this person. Oh, and I definitely can't cry when I'm around that person. And make
Hmm.
sure that you're asking more questions than what you are providing, because this person is going to need more. Like you were so much more like transactional, and
Yeah,
I just
and
find it
guarded.
so cool.
Yeah, and I think more guarded, right, Jeannie? I think that the pandemic taught us, number one, to your point, right, to be in tune with who we are, because we couldn't go anyplace, right? We were in our homes, and whether whomever you were with, whether you were alone or whether you were with your family, it's whomever you were with, it was just a very, very different, and it was surreal because none of us had ever gone through it.
Right.
So I think it's really, really interesting. And I also think that, what, it's like we were able to accomplish. I mean, for those that were not displaced in corporate America, or, the folks that were still working, they were just as effective or even more effective because they were home. They didn't have the commute, they didn't have the interruptions of meetings, or, people popping into the office. I just think it was a different time that taught us a lot of things. And being more open was definitely one of them.
I want to go back. I want to hear the story of your upbringing, and I'm curious how much of that helped condition you to who you are today.
Oh my goodness. I
So
am.
take me back to your neighborhood. Let's walk around Lisa's neighborhood for a minute.
Oh my goodness. So I'm an inner city kid. Grew up in Newark. Lived in an apartment. I'm one of six. I'm very proud of that. And I am. I'm laughing because I am a product of my mother. I'm also a product of my father in many different ways. But look, I grew up My parents were blue collar workers, and neither one of them had an education. And what I mean by that is, my dad only went up to fifth grade. My mom, I think, went up to fourth grade. So they didn't have an education. So education was really, 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 really
Were they from the
important.
U.S.?
No, so they were both born and raised in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
So they were raised, in very different times, and so education was a really big thing in my family because my parents used to say, look, people can take anything away from you, but the one thing that they can't take away from you is your education. And it's interesting, like I think back from like a cultural perspective. So I'm of Latina descent, and I'll share a very funny story. Everyone who sees me or meets me, it's like, well, how many kids do you have? How long have you been married? So I was in a cab in New York City 2 weeks ago, and I was on the phone with someone and I hung up, and the driver must have picked up that I was Latina somehow. I don't know. And he started talking about his son, and he's like, "Oh, you're getting on the train, and do you commute into New York?" and blah blah blah. Right? He was making chat, and then he says to me, he goes, "Well, how many kids do you have?" So I said to him, I said, "Oh, I said, I have two kids." I said, "And one is 12 and one is 11." And he's like, "Oh, are they boys or are they girls?" I'm like, "Oh, they're boys." And I was talking about my dogs.
That's great.
But you know what? It's like, and he was eating it up, and I was just like, till this day, it's like stereotypical. If you're Latina, you have to have human kids, and like that. And I share that with you because when I was growing up, my biggest fear was, it was just like I wanted to finish school, right? It was just like I wanted to get done with high school. I did not want to work in a factory. Not that there's anything wrong with working in a factory. I wanted to get a college education. I'm the first one in my family to have an MBA. So all of those things, like growing up from like the cultural perspective was, really instilled in me who I am today. But what I can tell you is that, my culture has influenced who I am. And there are times that I have to like catch myself, right? Because it's like, I grew up in the inner city, and my parents were very protective, and it's like when I'm in certain circles and people are talking about, well, I played this sport, or I did this, I was just like, I didn't have any of that. And listen, it doesn't diminish who I am today. It's just from those are the times that I'm like, culture really influenced my upbringing.
How did culture and your ethnicity play a part in your career?
Oh, Jeanie, I thought we were riffing here.
Come on, that's a part of who
questions.
you are. Yes. Deep
Those are
questions.
some
It's deep riffing.
You know what? I always I I have always felt that I have to work harder, you know, than anyone else, because I've been in many rooms for a very long time in my career where people don't look like me. And that's okay. That's okay. Because I have had many successes to date, and despite the fact that others don't look like me. And it's never, I never have never, I've never looked at it as a disadvantage or advantage. I just simply look at it as it's a different point of view at the table. And some people think, some people can handle it and some people can't. And what I mean by that is,
Yeah, tell me more.
listen,
Somebody that
yeah, yeah,
can't
yeah.
handle it. I want to hear that.
Yeah, there are people out there that can't handle all this Latina stuff. I'm Puerto Rican. We're very emotional. We're very passionate, and that all manifests in different ways. And for me, I'm an open book. I wear my emotions on my sleeve. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I do not have a poker face. And I do not have a poker face. And, I worked within an organization where they couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle it. It was like, you know what? You show all the pages of the book. You just need to show
Mm.
one page. I'm like, who works like that? But
Was
I've
that the
learned to,
feedback that you actually received? You show all the
yeah,
pages in the book?
yeah. We
Wow,
actually,
interesting.
yeah, it was very, very, very interesting. But look, at the end of the day, I believe, and I'm sure that you do too, that you have to stay true to who you are, and you have to be authentic, because that's part of your brand. That's
Mm.
part of who you are, right? And as I was preparing for this riff session with you, I was thinking this morning, I'm like, you know what? Part of who I am is, Jeanie, I cry. Like, I'm just like, I cry all the time. And there have been a lot of offices and a lot of conference rooms where I have cried. And, you know, it's just who I am, unfortunately.
Mm.
Or fortunately. For me, it's like, it is what it is, right? Like, you're going to see who I am through and through. I treat the intern the same way that I treat the CEO.
And here's what I love about that. And for anybody listening that maybe is starting out in their career, Elisa is chief marketing officer. Like, like you are a branding expert. You are a senior executive. You've worked with unbelievable brands,
Yeah.
and you are showing your heart and your authenticity every damn day, unapologetically, and embracing all those parts of yourself. And I'm kind of highlighting that as really like confirmation that we need to do this more, and then therein lies the real essence of who we are, and that's like the magic when we show up wholeheartedly and all of the dimensions of ourselves are present. It's just so beautiful and so refreshing that you shared that, and I thank you for that. I had the opposite problem. So I grew up in a very middle income Irish Catholic family, North Jersey. My grandparents are all from Ireland. They came here fourth, fifth grade education. Parents grew up in the Bronx, immigrated to New Jersey, because that's what happens. You go, right, you either go Brooklyn, Bronx, and then you eventually either hit Staten Island or you're coming to New Jersey.
Right.
And so my mother was a psychotherapist. My dad was an accountant, and he was a recovering alcoholic so he stopped drinking when I was very young, and we didn't have any money growing up. It wasn't until I was in high school that he started to have some success, and my mom, her practice started to take off. And really what it taught me is I tended to be kind of shy and very quiet, believe it or not, particularly going into high school. It wasn't until college that I started to find a little bit more of my personality and my strengths. But what I did when I first started my career is I hid a lot of my natural personality attributes for the sake of, I have to be business appropriate. I have to be business formal, especially in a financial services organization. And so I would often mess up smaller group dynamics because I was like, I must be this, I must be that. I was constantly putting myself in these
Hmm.
boxes, and I was screwing up so much, like just making bad decisions, not really making good choices on how to navigate certain situations. But more than anything is that I was like really fighting my natural personality. Like I had, before they coined the phrase resting bitch face. You have a question? You have a question. Now, for anybody that's not watching this and only listening, I'm making like a very unemotional, I call it the New Jersey Turnpike face.
Yeah.
You're trying to decide whether or not you're going to change lanes. That was what it was like, but it wasn't real. It wasn't really who I was. It was a defense mechanism. So it wasn't until like I started to get older that I started to give myself a bit of a permission, and I tuned down my self-critic. That could be a whole nother riff we could have about how loud our
Yeah.
self-critics are. But my self-critic was very problematic, and she would often interfere and tell me that wasn't smart enough, that wasn't good enough, do that again, don't say that, don't, oh, you said that. So she was constantly like in my ear. And it wasn't until really like the last 10 or 15 years that I started to say, you know what, this is who I am. And actually, the more authentic and genuine and personable my natural state is, so effortless. Why am I fighting it? And I would be attracting all this great opportunity and these amazing clients and these amazing people that I got to meet and talk with, the more grounded and aligned I was to the essence of who I was. And it was really that primary ingredient was the whole reason I started this Warriors at Work platform, because I would see it in talking with clients. You know, that moment when you're like, yes, you're in alignment. This is your most effective and natural person. Forget the veneers. So I knew I needed to forget the veneers and just be out there and be who I was, and messy as hell, flawed as hell, but okay with it.
Yeah.
And a lot of it comes back to just how I was brought up. We were left to, my mom taught us to be very probably counter dependent, terrible asking for help, but pushed us in a way where you work hard. You don't have to be the smartest kid in the room, but work harder than anybody else. Ask the better questions. And myself and my brothers were all given that gift of smart intuition. We're all sensors and feelers. We can pick up things, and we've all been able to capitalize it in some way. But I feel really, really grateful about my upbringing, because it makes me very real and very relatable to a lot of different peoples.
Yeah.
And
I want,
appreciate that.
I want to go back to something that you said, just in terms of when you had your armor up. How did you feel inside?
Scared.
Being,
Scared, insecure. I always had this thing in my head. It's like I was an average student, Elisa, at best. I was a full year younger than everyone in my grade, because when we were growing up, you could do that. Like, I was born in January. My mom put me ahead, a year ahead. Rather than holding me back, I would have been the oldest kid in my class. So I grew up thinking I had a learning challenge that was undiagnosed, and that was not something that would have been done. And they would never have put me like into a special ed class, because I didn't have all of the signs of it, but certain things, abstract things. And so I, in my mind, was always trying to compensate for, well, I never thought I was smart enough, not realizing that there were some things that I could have done differently. My parents could have done differently. I went to a very average college. It was a lot of fun, liberal arts college. I worked really hard for B's, like really, really, really hard. I'm not a natural student, but I always had a higher index on emotional intelligence. And I've always been able to figure out everything you see, everything you read, know about me is completely self-made. I am a self-study kid. And I coach people from some of the smartest colleges, some of the smartest people in the world, literally, are my clients. And I realize that my academic pedigree, if you will, and all of my certifications and all the things I chose to do is not what makes me successful as a coach and as an igniter of real power in other people. It's my God-given gift is my ability to truly see, hear, and understand who someone is, and really get to it and help them to see, how will you capitalize this regardless of the circumstance. So I help them find their courage. And I think it's because I led a very kind of, you got to work for everything life. But I think that's why I did it. It was a complete defense mechanism.
Yeah. But what's so amazing about you is that when anyone meets you, like right off the bat, they know, like, you're like that instant connection and that warmth, and
Thank you.
everything about you is just so real, in terms of you're not faking it, right? So it doesn't matter where you went to school. It's similar to, as I'm listening to you talk about that, it just takes me to, for those listening, who, no matter where you are in your career, or no matter what path you're on right now, like a degree from a certain college doesn't define who you are. the same thing as a title doesn't define who you are or the company that you work for,
Yes.
right? And I think that those are the things that are so important, that we, like, that society, just we get caught up in these labels, like, you have to work at a certain company for X amount of years, or else
Mm,
you're labeled a jumper, you move around too much,
so
right? And
true.
or you have to work, and you have to get the house, and you have to have the picket fence, or and have the kids. And it's like, that's not the way. It's not for everyone, you know.
Yeah. Well, if you think about too, what were the messages you heard when you were growing up? You
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
you must go to college, you
Yeah,
must get a job, and this is what your timeline's going to look like. And I didn't figure it out till I was in my early 30s. And I
and that's
remember it
okay.
vividly, where I was like, how the hell did I get here? And I did
Yeah,
really well, but I was like, I don't want any of this. I
yeah.
really, and again, it was another loss. It was a loss of my mom, where I started to do some real soul work, because I had been certified when I was on maternity leave with my oldest daughter. And when she passed away suddenly from a heart attack, I was like, all right, what does my next chapter really look like? And this ain't it. This commuting, in and out of North Jersey down to the shore. No, thank you. I am not interested in traveling. I've got a newborn. A husband had just graduated chiropractic school. My dad was a mess emotionally. And it was like I really sunk into that pain and that loss and that
Mm-hmm.
grief. And I know that that's been a big part of like your growth and evolution too, is like you sit with it and you listen. What's here for me to learn? And then you come from that and apply it to whatever you need to in the next part of your life. As like my mom passing away, as hard as that was probably one of the most transformative experiences of my life, because it moved me to another place almost in an accelerated way. I probably would have eventually gotten to my own
Yeah.
entrepreneurial model, but that just gave me so much like fire in my belly, like tick tock, tick tock, time is of the essence. What are we going to do? How many people do you want to help? What is this really going to look like? And I know so much of this really resonates, because you've also had a lot of challenge and grief in your life. And when I use the word transformation, like I could even see you like sinking. So like, tell me what comes up for you when I say transformation.
It's really interesting, because transformation, evolution, and I'm thinking about so many things, and I'm thinking about how so many of us have been transformed or have evolved, um, from life's unexpectedness, if you
Mm,
will, and I think that, listening to you say, how you were transformed, when after your mom passed away and you had your first daughter. For me, it's like I was transformed when, in March of 2020, when I was furloughed, when
mm,
there had already been so much loss, right? At that point, I had just lost my father a few months earlier. And then losing my job, it was like losing my identity, because
mm.
the world of sports and entertainment had come to a complete halt. So it wasn't like, I was furloughed and, the economy was booming and then I was able to go out and get another job. So it's just really interesting how things hit you and things happen, and it force you to be get out of your comfort zone, and force you
Mm.
to look at the map upside down or sideways, right? No matter, I don't know, I mean, at that point it was like upside down for a long time.
So true. Oh,
But yeah, right, but look, I think about, had that not happened, or had that time not happened, I probably would have never met you, So,
so
and
true.
right? And I mean, I think about Marissa and making the introduction to us, and I think about all those wonderful women that, I spoke to during those lunchtime conversations because everyone was home and, I was trying to learn how to use IG Live.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think about all those things and it's just different now, Jeannie. It's just different. There's,
I was thinking about those lunchtime conversations
mhm,
and how you created a platform to get powerful women to share who they were in the world, and how that had such a ripple effect on anyone who was listening or watching. And so now here we are, we're ending 2022. What are you curious about now?
oh my goodness, there's so many things that I'm curious about. Um, I'm curious about how people have evolved. I'm curious about what's important to people today versus, last year or the year before. And I'm curious as to what's going to propel people to the next level. And is it the same level that they were thinking about 5 years ago? You know?
Mm, yeah. I'm
What are
I'm
you
s-
curious about? What are you curious about?
it's funny. My when I think of the question, my brain immediately goes to the worry column. I'm curious how these things are going to work out, but it's based in worry. So it's not true curiosity. The things that I'm curious about are relating to aging. How am I aging? What are the things that I want what are the things that are out there that I don't know about yet? Or maybe what are the trends going into 2023 that I don't know anything about yet? And how am I going to grow and evolve and potentially transform because of those trends? And I'm not just saying business trends, like life trends. Like, what
Yeah.
are the things that we're going to be talking about? Am I still going to be like at nighttime addicted to Instagram reels? Watching dogs. I'm loving dogs and horses. I don't know what that's about. Is that still going to be a thing? Am I still going to want to work out 6 days a week? Am I going to start ever going back to yoga? Like, what's my body going to do for me?
Mm,
I'm going to be 54 in a couple of weeks. And that number sounds so old to me. But
no.
I feel so young and so
Mm,
vital and so sharp. And I feel like I'm in this part of my life, like I'm almost just getting started, but yet I have a ton of wisdom. It's
yeah.
wild. So those are the things. And then I'm curious, like, what are my kids going to be like a year from now? I'm going to have an almost sophomore in college and an almost sophomore in high school. Like, what are they going to be like? So those are the things that I get really curious about. And then, always from like this platform, what is the Warriors at Work platform going to look like? Who's going to be on here? What are the things that I'm going to
Mm,
tackle? What are the subjects that I'm going to tackle? Like the primary reason I thought of you for this and in getting into the dialogue about questions and riffing with you is I often will sit here in this lab. That's what I call my office, my laboratory. And I run ideas past myself. I run thoughts past myself. I mean, I have circles of friends and I have circles of colleagues, but I don't have anything on a regular and consistent basis that I would sit and ask some of these questions of. And I said, I don't want to talk to someone who looks like me, that sounds like me, that came from my background. I want someone else,
mhm.
but I want them to share my value system. I want them to believe what I believe. And you were the first person that came to my
Oh,
mind. And I love how you embody joy and goodness. It is such a part of your DNA. And I feel like that's so much of what the world needs right now.
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna do this. I hope it comes across on the camera.
Yes. Little heart right back at you.
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, it's really interesting. And here's what I think is going to happen with your Warriors platform. I see it, and I've told you this many times. I am convinced that I'm going to see the Jeanie Coomber show on Netflix or on Hulu, and that's going to happen. And I'm telling you right here, I don't know, today's December 15th, 2022. You heard it here first. But I believe that, because I believe that that's where you're going. And I believe that these are all the steps that you're taking to get there. I believe it wholeheartedly. And I've told you that many times, because when I think of everything that you've done and what you're doing and what you continue to do, that's going to be your transformation, and that's what's going to propel you soon. So just know that.
Thank you so much for saying that. I received that, and I deeply, deeply appreciate it. What a cool way to end this conversation, talking about identity. We talked about personal identity, professional identity. We answered some bigger questions on who we are. So stay tuned for more. Now we're going to get into how we solve things in the world, what we believe, what we're putting out there. So Elisa, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeanie.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Warriors at Work show. If you are interested in learning more about what we do at the Warriors at Work show and platform, be sure to go over to my website, Jeanie Coomber, and subscribe to my monthly Warrior Playbook newsletter. I share everything that I'm up to month by month, as well as some lessons and insights that I've learned. I'm also interested in hearing any feedback you have about this conversation or future topics. So reach out to me directly on jc@jeaniecoomber.com or on LinkedIn. Be sure to tell your friends and your colleagues about this Warriors at Work conversation. Subscribe, review, and rate us. It's the best way to get this message out into the world. Be well.